Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools, and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being, and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being. Welcome to the 262nd episode of the award-winning Diverse Minds podcast. As mentioned in episode 261, the podcast will now be fortnightly since the 5th birthday episode, episode number 260. But this month's theme is all about conflict and managing it. And in the last episode, I talked about external events of the racist riots and how they've negatively impacted global majority staff and their well-being. I highlighted the ongoing injustice and why we must keep speaking about race equity in the workplace. But in this week's episode, I wanted to talk more broadly about conflict in the workplace, what it means, what it looks like, and what are some of the ways that we can look to address conflict at work. Now, of course, workplace conflict is a very broad concept, which includes any type of conflict that takes place within work. This could be among colleagues, with managers, it could be with customers, beneficiaries, it could happen inside or outside work. Now, what actually causes workplace conflict? Well, I would say so many of us as humans, we carry what is often known as baggage, and we bring it into the workplace. And interestingly, there is a growing area of research around trauma in the workplace and how we bring trauma into work, or how trauma might show up at work and what workplaces can do. We will all come from a completely different family context, culture, however you want to define family, and our lived experiences will shape that. Inequity is a huge part, of course, in conflict, power imbalances, which feed into inequity, communication misunderstandings, anything around bullying, whether it's covert or overt. So overt would be verbal, physical abuse, violence at work. Covert being marginalized, being left out of meetings, being pushed to the side, things that people can, quote unquote, get away with without being caught, a real lack of cooperation and no teamwork. And of course, when conflict in the workplace arises, there needs to be practical advice and guidance to address this, which personally I think is incredibly tricky. One for the UK, because the UK is a very conflict avoidant culture. And for more information about culture and cultural frameworks, please listen to episodes 106 to 109 about culture. So we've got episodes where we talk to culture experts. I review the book Culture Map by Erin Meyer. I talk about culturally inclusive meetings and cultural appropriation, just to give you a flavor. So I really hope you're enjoying the content of the show and want to keep up to date. Then if you are, please, why not join my newsletter? When you join my mailing list, you'll receive my free white paper on inclusive language and mental health. And that link is bit.ly/ILMHCK. So conflict feels very big. It's very broad. There's a lot to it. So what can you do to manage conflict at work? Now, unfortunately, workplace conflict is inevitable and exists in all workplaces in some shape or form. But I would say the first step is really about being proactive. And when I say that, I mean acknowledging that it's going to happen and taking preventative measures to reduce it. So what might those preventative measures look like? So this is things like team charters and clarity about working styles, how people like to work together. So if we think back to one of the areas of conflict, which is communication, this can really help with that. Good, solid management training and leadership training, because within those training sessions, what needs to be addressed is what conflict is, how it could come up, how it could be managed. People are ready and trained with that, and the training's of a high quality. That really helps. Another thing that's very useful, and being a trained workplace mediator myself, I will say this, is to have an internal mediation pool, or definitely have links to a mediation organization or independent mediators that can help you. Now, the issue with mediation is what happens is people go to mediation as a sort of last ditch attempt, maybe before an employment tribunal or before a formal grievance. That's actually not the time to go to mediation. Of course, it can be done, and that's when most people do it at that stage. My issue with that is at that point, before it goes to a formal process, people are really clutching on to their positions very, very tightly. And the chance that both people are entering it, particularly, I've always seen this, one side has definitely got something that they're shielding or they don't really want to be open about. That's why often mediation processes fail at that stage. I think if we talk and have mediation always talked about, and using mediation models in conversations with minor conflicts and things that I like to say fizzle up, that can really help. So having a mediation focused culture, thinking about what mediation means. And something that I've seen very often is people say, oh, the line manager's mediating. And I say, well, is the line manager a mediator? No, they're just sort of, getting both sides to talk. And that's another key issue. Don't use the word mediation when you just mean facilitated conversation, because they're very, very different. Mediation is a very specific process that you have to be trained in. The training is big, it's intense. I had to do it 7 days, and I had to do submit work around it. It's not no one can just go in and mediate. Now, there is a difference between having a line manager hold a facilitated conversation, but please don't call that a mediation. So yes, and how do we train managers in having positive facilitative conversations, and how do we use mediation, and how do you get the whole organization to understand a meditative approach? I think the other thing is to have a coaching academy, or again, coaches that can support positive management, leadership, and employee practices. And there is a culture in most organizations of people at a certain level get access to coaches, but I would say, why not everyone? Because again, it's a proactive tool. People can be coached on their careers. They can be coached on managing upwards. How do I manage this? And have a space to have those conversations and work through something in a positive way where no one's telling them what to do. They're having time to find the answers for themselves. And mediation is very different to coaching. And of course, training courses across the base that address conflict is going to happen. People knowing their conflict styles, I think that's really important, so they can reflect on it and thinking about that. So that's definitely one of my areas, I think, of taking proactive measures, because managing conflict in the workplace really helps to look at communication styles, creates open communication between all employees. You can manage and deal and assess with a lot of underlying issues. It also helps align, or definitely can, if it's done proactively, align employees to reach the same goal. And normally we're at work to be productive, etc. So to reach the same goal, to get to a project and resolve disagreements in a more effective and quicker way. Of course, if we don't manage conflict in the workplace effectively, we know that there are going to be incredibly damaged relationships between employees. And usually what happens is they start to escalate up the formal grievance and process stage. Now, I'm not saying that shouldn't happen. Of course, those need to be in place. Every organization, especially if they're big, need to have an official policy. But of course, we don't want things to be going formal all the time, because it takes a lot of time and energy for everyone. And I think if people keep going to the formal, we have wasted time and resources. Whereas actually, if a manager just says, I think I just need to touch base with a coach, or things seem a bit uncomfortable, I want to have a facilitated conversation, but I want a mediator to do that, knowing that it's not full mediation, that can really help. You also see high staff turnover, resulting in higher recruitment costs. And remember from a previous episode, recruitment of a new member of staff costs between £4,000 to £6,000 on average. Of course, the more senior the level, the more it costs. But the high staff turnover is because when you enter often formal processes, they're very stressful. And one of the parties, if not more, will end up leaving. It also leads to a bad reputation. We know Glassdoor, these review sites, people do write things and they are very open, especially with social media. And therefore, you're not likely to have a very good talent acquisition as a result of that. And of course, poor working environment is toxic. It's not good for anyone's mental health and well-being. And who wants to work in that, which then links to the other points I mentioned. So often as well, in order to be proactive, and we know why we need to do that, is to understand conflict. So how can conflicts arise? And I don't think we often spend a lot of time on this. So one of the first things is about mapping understanding around what conflicts are, what do they look like, where can you look back at some data without attributing them to anyone, but if you have got the data around bullying, grievance, harassment cases, and sometimes it's not, they don't necessarily fall into those categories. It can be a conflict of personalities, but understanding the map of your organization. So where are our themes and what's going on? And then I think it's about ensuring proper grievance training. So before the training, proper grievance policies, and then training for HR and relevant parties that would be involved in that. And actually using external expertise. I think I've seen so many grievance policies where they're so punitive, the language, you might need a solicitor to interpret it. They need to be accessible and easy to understand. So once you understand the kind of your conflict map, how it might arise, you can help employees to think about solutions, what's going to work. So you're there to, whatever if your role is related to this, is to think about how do we really want to manage our conflicts? What's going to work? And at which levels, if there's a particular area that you think, oh, we've had a lot of conflicts in this area, what training might you need? What conversations might you need? What approach might you need? And actually, something I forgot to mention was restorative justice. And a restorative justice model is really wonderful. I'm not a restorative justice myself, but it's used a lot in schools. And I think the model is really great. But there is someone that has to take the responsibility of having been the harmer, which is different to mediation. And it's a very different process. So that's a model you might want to look into as well. So thinking about the conflicts, how they might have arisen, what the solutions might be, what might be the best way forward. And a lot of this is going to be led by senior leadership team and people's personalities in leadership team. It flows down, as we've seen, interestingly, I think on a global scale with various governments. And then building on that, ensuring proper grievance training, because conflict, unfortunately, is inevitable. Avoiding it doesn't help. But thinking about what systems you have in place and how to do this proactively will. And also power imbalances and inequity are a huge chunk of conflicts and conflict resolution, and proper training and knowing how to deal with this is essential. And if this is a subject you'd like to know more about, don't forget I run workshops, training sessions and keynotes for organizations all about creating positive, happy and equal workplaces. So please get in touch to find out more about how I could help you at Layla, Leyla at diverseminds.co.uk. And I really hope you've enjoyed today's show and shows over the last 5 years. And if you have, why not write me a review on Apple, Spotify, or whatever you listen to your podcast from. And of course, I'd love to hear from you as listeners. And to make this super easy, I've created a place online where you can leave me a voice note anonymously called SpeakPipe with your name if you choose. The link is in the show notes and I'll also give it to you here. It is bit.ly/SPKPDMP. And don't forget, have you watched my TEDx talk where I talk about my experience of navigating difficult, tricky situations and conflict? It's about the connection between culture, race, and mental health in the workplace. It's something you can watch in your break as it's just 12 minutes long, and the link is in the show notes, but I'll also give it to you here, bit.ly/TEDx Wolves, WOLVESLO. I really hope you enjoy it because it was a labor of love. And if you did, please leave me a positive comment on YouTube, share and like. And also don't forget to connect with me on LinkedIn and Facebook at Diverse Minds UK. So until then, everyone, take care. And next month, because it's Black History Month and the theme is changing narrative, we are going to have a whole series about dominant narratives and changing narratives. So until then, take care and bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.